In this part, we will talk about the twilight of the Visigothic kingdom. We're going to embark on, well, a pretty fascinating journey, I think, through the final centuries of Visigothic rule in Iberia. We'll be unpacking the pivotal events, the influential figures, and the societal transformations that led to its eventual collapse.
Yeah, it's a really crucial period.
Our mission here for you listening is to understand how this formidable kingdom, which really carved out its own unique identity after the fall of Rome, navigated all these internal divisions and external pressures, and how that ultimately shaped the future of the Iberian Peninsula in, well, some profound ways.
Absolutely, there's a lot there.
Get ready to uncover the surprising resilience, the political machinations, and the cultural shifts that really define this critical era. So let's unpack this moment in history. When we talk about the twilight of the Visigothic kingdom, we're really starting with a major turning point, an inflection point, you could say, the Battle of Vouillé in 507. What exactly happened there, and why was it so incredibly significant for the Visigoths?
What's truly fascinating here, and maybe often overlooked, is that the Battle of Vouillé fought near Poitiers. It wasn't just another military defeat. For the Visigoths, it was an existential crisis.
Really? That's strong a word.
Oh, yeah. The Frankish king Clovis, he was leading this formidable army, estimated maybe around 40,000 warriors, and importantly, a significant cavalry component. He delivered a decisive blow to the Visigoths under their king Alaric II.
Okay.
Now, Visigothic forces were likely of similar strength, but the crucial factor, the one that really turned the tide, was that the anticipated Ostrogothic aid, the help Alaric had desperately hoped for, it just never materialized.
So they were essentially left isolated, facing the Franks completely alone. But why didn't that Ostrogothic support arrive? Was it just, bad timing, or was there something more deliberate at play?
That's a crucial question, and it points to a deeper geopolitical game, really. The sources strongly suggest that Byzantine armies attacked Ostrogothic territory in Italy precisely at this moment. This was probably no mere coincidence. It strategically prevented Theodoric the Great, the powerful Ostrogothic king, from coming to Alaric II's aid. This raises an important question for us. Was this a carefully coordinated strategic move by Constantinople, designed specifically to ensure Alaric faced the Franks without his most powerful potential ally?
Wow.
It certainly looks like a masterful piece of Byzantine diplomacy and military timing, effectively weakening two potential rivals in the West in one go.
That's a truly aha moment right there, seeing how actions happening far away can domino into such significant local consequences. So what was the immediate fallout of this battle? Beyond the loss of life, how did it fundamentally alter the Visigothic state?
Well, the battle itself resulted in the death of Alaric II. That was a tremendous blow to Visigothic prestige and power, obviously. This effectively marked the de facto end of the Balthi-led Visigothic power in Gaul. Think about it. They'd established this dominant presence there, expanding their territories. But after Vouillé, well, while they managed to retain a small sliver of Gaul, specifically Septimania, with Narbonne as its capital, they never truly reclaimed the vast territories held by kings like Euric and Alaric II before them.
So it shrunk considerably.
Massively. This defeat fundamentally forced a significant geographic and political reorientation. They were pushed south, you see, into the Iberian Peninsula, away from their traditional heartland in Gaul.
Imagine, just for a moment, being a Visigoth at this time. You've established this powerful, growing presence in Gaul, maybe even feeling like the rightful heirs to a part of the Roman legacy, only to be utterly defeated and pushed south into a new land that is not entirely yours and certainly not empty. What psychological and practical challenges would you face? How would this traumatic experience of loss and displacement shape your identity, your vision for the future of your people? It's a profound shift, moving from being a dominant force in one region to having to reestablish yourself completely in another.
Absolutely. It wasn't just a physical move, it was a cultural and political reset. The trauma of Vouillé meant they couldn't simply rule Iberia in the same way they had Gaul. They had to forge a new kingdom, facing entirely new challenges and, well, different power dynamics.
So the Visigoths are now primarily in Iberia, but as you said, it's not an empty canvas. They're moving into this complex landscape, dealing with remnants of Roman authority, various local powers, and other barbarian groups too. This period of establishing a new phase of the kingdom must have been fraught with internal and external challenges. Who were the key players in this early consolidation, and what specific obstacles did they encounter?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Visigoths weren't just settling, they were trying to assert dominance in a contested space. After Alaric II's death at Vouillé, the succession was tumultuous, to say the least.
Right.
His illegitimate son, Gesalic, was initially elected king by the people, which actually tells us quite a lot about the still prevailing elective nature of the monarchy among the Goths, a legacy from their tribal past. However, he was quickly succeeded by Alaric's legitimate son, Alaric, who ruled from 526 to 531. This period, the early to mid-6th century, was really marked by ongoing internal power struggles among the Visigothic elite and, crucially, the pressing need to consolidate genuine, direct control over the diverse regions of the Iberian Peninsula.
So it wasn't an immediate, seamless takeover then. There were still pockets of resistance or areas that weren't fully under their sway.
Precisely. The chronicler Wanda Biclaro, writing a bit later, offers a vital perspective on this struggle. He suggests that before the reign of Leovigild, who we'll definitely get to, there was no consistent, sedentary, or, directly controlling Visigothic presence in many southern regions, like the area around Valencia, for example.
Interesting.
Early accounts, such as the Chronica Caesaragostana from the late 5th century, primarily refer to troop movements in the Ebro Valley, a key strategic corridor, rather than widespread popular Visigothic settlement or deep administrative control across the entire peninsula. This indicates a more fractured, maybe military-centric presence in those early years.
That paints a picture of a kingdom still very much in formation, rather than one fully established. But then we have intriguing figures like King Theudas. He seems to stand out because his actions suggest a different kind of authority, maybe. Tell us about him.
Yeah, consider the intriguing case of King Theudas. Even though Amalaric was technically king to Eir around 527, holding the legitimate claim, it was Theudas who emerged as a powerful regent and then king himself.
All right.
What's particularly noteworthy is that Theudas, despite being an Arian, a follower of a different branch of Christianity from the Catholic majority in Hispania, granted peace to the Catholic Church. More than that, he notably allowed Catholic bishops to hold a council in Toledo.
Even though he was Arian. That's surprising.
It is. And Isidore of Seville, a key contemporary historian and a Catholic himself, explicitly credits Theudas, not Amalaric, with these actions. This strongly suggests that Theudas's real power and influence extended far beyond the Ebro Valley, probably encompassing most of Hispania. This raises an important question for us. What does this tell us about the fluid nature of royal authority in this nascent stage of the kingdom? And also about the surprising pragmatism and perhaps even a degree of religious tolerance that could exist, even if temporarily, in a period often characterized by sectarian division. It shows a king perhaps willing to work with, rather than simply conquer, the existing ecclesiastical structures.
That's a crucial insight, that even in these early volatile times, a form of political calculation and religious accommodation was at play. But this wasn't all internal, was it? You mentioned external challenges. The Byzantine Empire was still very much a player in the Mediterranean world, and presumably in Iberia, too.
Oh, absolutely. The peninsula was far from peaceful, and external powers were indeed watching and often acting. The Visigoths continued to face challenges, not least from the formidable Byzantine Empire, which, for instance, intervened directly in the region.
Oh, so.
Well, King Athanagild, who reigned from roughly 551 to 567, found himself in a civil war against Theodogizil's chosen successor. In what looks like a desperate move, he called in an Eastern Roman army, essentially Byzantine forces, to support his rebellion.
Risky.
Very. While this move helped him against his Visigothic rivals and secured his own kingship, it came at a significant cost. It introduced a powerful external actor directly into the heart of southern Spain. In essence, you could say he opened Pandora's box to Byzantine influence, establishing a lasting presence that the Visigoths would struggle to dislodge for decades. Athanagild also resumed marriage politics with the Franks, which sounds maybe innocuous, but led to the infamous Brunhilde, his daughter, going to the Frankish court, which in turn entangled the Visigoths in complex and often bloody Frankish dynastic struggles.
So they traded one immediate problem for a long-term geopolitical headache. It's clear this was a kingdom in constant flux, constantly negotiating its power. Okay, this brings us to a figure who many consider a true unifier. So we're seeing this kingdom starting to take shape, but it's still fraught with challenges, internal and external. Then comes Leovigild, a figure who truly sought to unify and strengthen the Visigothic realm. Tell us about his impact and the dramatic events that unfolded during his reign, particularly how he approached the religious divisions within his kingdom.
Leovigild's reign from 569 to 586 is truly a watershed moment in Visigothic history. A contemporary, Johannes of Bello, who was actually a Catholic chronicler, remarkably described him as the restorer of the land of the Goths, claiming Leovigild brought it back to its ancient borders after it had been diminished by numerous uprisings and external incursions.
High praise, especially from a Catholic chronicler for an Arian king.
Exactly. Leovigild was an astute politician and military leader. He clearly understood how to make the regnum, the kingdom, the royal domain attractive, drawing the best warriors to his cause, and effectively sidelining local tyrants and regional strongmen who threatened central authority.
He sounds like a force of nature, consolidating power through both military might and shrewd political strategy. What did his military campaigns actually look like?
Almost every single year of his reign saw him leading his army, actively campaigning against a multitude of threats. The Byzantines in the south, the Suebians in the northwest, who were, interestingly, newly converted to Catholicism, the ever-resilient Basques in the north, and, crucially, internal enemies, Visigothic nobles and local magnates who challenged his authority. These campaigns weren't just about winning battles, they were about systematically asserting royal control over the entire peninsula.
And he founded a city, too, right? Recopolis.
Yes. To solidify this new unified vision, he founded a brand new city, Recopolis, in 578, named after his second son, Recopolis. This act of city founding was a bold, almost imperial gesture, something previously dared only by figures like Theodoric the Great among the Ostrogoths and maybe the Vandal king Huneric in Africa.
What was the point?
Its purpose was clear: to establish Recopolis as a new Visigothic capital in central Spain, a physical manifestation of his consolidated power and vision for the kingdom. A statement.
Founding a city is certainly a statement of permanence, a claim to imperial grandeur.
Right.
And he didn't stop there in mimicking imperial statecraft, did he? He tried to set up a dynasty.
Not at all. Leovigild's dynastic ambitions were equally significant. To limit the deeply entrenched election rights of the nobility, which, let's face it, often led to instability, he made his two sons, Hermenegild and Recerd, co-regents, or consortes regi. This move was a clear attempt to establish a hereditary dynasty, again mimicking the Roman imperial model of succession. He was trying to shift the kingdom from a volatile elective system to a more stable hereditary one. But this naturally alienated powerful segments of the aristocracy who liked being able to choose the king.
Right, taking away their power. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. His theological walkway, as you described it earlier. This wasn't just about personal faith. It was a deeply political strategy, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Leovigild's religious policy was intensely political, completely intertwined with his vision of a unified state. He was an Arian Christian, as was the Visigothic ruling caste. His ultimate aim was religious unification of the peninsula, but crucially, not through conversion to the Catholicism of the Hispano-Roman majority.
Right, the other way around.
Exactly. He sought to make Arianism the unifying faith of Hispanic Christianity. His strategy was seemingly generous on the surface. He offered a pathway for Catholics to convert to Arianism, presenting it as maybe a more rational, less dogmatic interpretation of Christianity, even relaxing some of the more rigid Arian theological positions.
There's always a however.
Always. This move was largely, if not entirely, a countermeasure against the Byzantine Empire, whose banner was unequivocally Roman Catholicism. By establishing a distinct, unified Arian church, Leovigild aimed to deny the Byzantines any religious pretext for intervention in Visigothic affairs. He wanted a single Visigothic-controlled church. Simple as that.
So he was trying to use religion as a tool for national unity and to insulate his kingdom from external interference. That's incredibly clever, actually. But this grand plan for religious unity under Arianism ultimately didn't stick, did it? What went wrong? Why did it fail?
Unfortunately for Leovigild, no. His ambitious project failed, and it failed largely because Gothic Arianism had, by this point, fallen too far behind Roman Orthodoxy Catholicism in both intellectual rigor and, crucially, popular piety. Arianism struggled to provide the sophisticated theological arguments or the widespread popular appeal that Catholicism had cultivated over centuries. It felt perhaps more like a state religion imposed from above than a vibrant faith embraced by the populace. This intellectual and popular decline of Arianism within the Visigothic realm effectively set the stage for the dramatic and ultimately successful shift by his successor.
So Leovigild's ambitious attempts to unify the kingdom under Arianism ultimately didn't stick, leaving the religious landscape still fractured. This brings us to his son, Recerd, who made a monumental decision that profoundly changed the course of Visigothic history. What was that decision, and what were its immediate consequences for the kingdom and its people?
This raises an important question, doesn't it? Why did Raecyrt succeed where his father, a powerful and capable ruler, had failed so decisively? Raecyrt, who was crowned in 586, is often depicted by chroniclers like Isidore of Seville as deeply pious and vastly different from his irreligious and warlike father.
Convenient narrative, maybe.
Well, whether this was entirely true or perhaps a later Catholic embellishment to celebrate his conversion, Raecyrt clearly understood the political realities on the ground. He recognized that for the long-term unity and stability of the Visigothic kingdom, conversion to Catholicism was not just a desirable option, but the only viable path forward. The Arian project, as we discussed, was intellectually and popularly, well, pretty much moribund by then.
So it was less about a sudden spiritual epiphany, perhaps, and more about a calculated strategic move for the kingdom's survival and future.
It was almost certainly a blend of both, personal conviction and political necessity. But the strategic imperative was undeniable. After a decade of intense debates, internal struggles, and facing down significant resistance from Arian hardliners within the Gothic nobility, Raecyrt publicly converted to Catholicism.
Wow, that's a huge step.
It was a massive undertaking, as it involved bringing the entire Gothic people, or at least its ruling elite, and a substantial portion of the population from the stain of ingrained error, as Isidore rather dramatically put it, to the worship of the true faith. This wasn't just a personal conversion, it was a state-sponsored religious revolution.
That's a huge undertaking, especially given his father's efforts to promote Arianism just before him. What about the immediate political fallout? Were there rebellions or significant resistance to this radical shift?
Oh, there absolutely were. This was not a smooth transition by any means. Consider the political machinations that preceded and even paved the way for Raecyrt's decision. His own brother, Hermenegild.
Ah, yes, the rebel.
Right. He had already rebelled against their father Leovigild back in 579, playing the role of the persecuted Catholic and actively seeking alliances with the Byzantines, with local city lords whose autonomy Leovigild had curtailed, with the recently Catholicized Suebians in northwest Spain, and even with his Frankish in-laws.
Quite the coalition.
It was. Leovigild, being a master strategist, expertly exploited Merovingian disunity among the Franks to counter this encirclement. But the blueprint for our Catholic opposition, aligned with external powers, had already been laid. Leovigild likely learned from his brother's failed example and his father's subsequent struggle.
So Hermenegild's rebellion, though ultimately suppressed, had maybe shown Raecyrt a path, however dangerous, to potential unity with the Hispano-Roman majority. How was Raecyrt's conversion formally acknowledged and implemented then? Where did it become official?
Raecyrt's conversion was officially sanctioned and formalized at the immensely significant Third Council of Toledo in 589. This wasn't just a religious gathering. It was a profound political act, attended by 72 bishops from Hispania, Gallia, and Galatia. It was a monumental event that unified the religious and political leadership of the kingdom under one banner.
Okay.
Crucially, the council allowed former Arian clergy to retain their positions after formally converting. This showcased a pragmatic degree of reconciliation rather than outright persecution, which undoubtedly helped smooth the transition for many.
Smart move.
Yeah. The council also addressed practical administrative issues, like dealing with parishes in Carthaginensis, an area where Cartagena was still under Greek Byzantine control. They ruled they could be maintained by lay clerks if they couldn't afford a priest.
Interesting detail.
And Juan de Biclara's chronicle, while invaluable for this period, reveals a clear Hispano-Gothic nationalist bias. He explicitly exalts this new unity and goes so far as to equate the newly Catholicized Gothic kingdom with the Roman Empire itself, claiming its rightful place as a successor power. This conversion cemented a new, distinctly Catholic Visigothic identity that would define the kingdom for the rest of its existence.
With Catholicism now the official religion, it feels like the Visigothic kingdom should have entered a period of stability, almost a golden age maybe, with religious unity forging a stronger state. But as we know, history is rarely that simple. What kind of internal challenges, political maneuvering, and societal strains continued to plague the kingdom throughout the 7th century, even with this newfound religious cohesion?
What's fascinating here is that even with religious unity, the kingdom was far from stable. After Raecyrt, the issue of succession continued to be a flashpoint, constantly threatening the fragile peace. Take Witteric's 7-year reign, for example. Isidore of Seville, while acknowledging his military capacity, offered a pretty demolishing description of his character and rule.
Ouch.
Witteric found himself struggling against the Byzantines in southern Spain, despite the Byzantines themselves facing immense difficulties with the Lombards over in Italy. His diplomatic attempts, such as a proposed marriage alliance with the Merovingian Theodoric II of Burgundy, also failed spectacularly, highlighting the kingdom's precarious international standing and likely internal divisions.
So even with a strong military, if the politics are unstable, it's a constant struggle. Who came after Witteric and what were the particular challenges they faced?
Sisebuto succeeded Witteric and initially oversaw significant territorial gains against the Byzantines, pushing them back further. However, his reign also saw the implementation of harsh, systematic policies against the Jewish population, transforming them from a long-standing, often integrated community into a marginalized minority within the kingdom.
So religious unity for Christians didn't mean tolerance for others.
Not at all. This was a dark chapter showing how religious unity could also be weaponized for persecution, and Sisebuto's death after 9 years is shrouded in mystery. Isidore's short version of his chronicle suggests he was poisoned.
Again.
Yeah, but in a later, longer version, he revised it, attributing the death to an overdose of medicine. This raises an important question for historians. Was a crime deliberately hidden behind this correction, perhaps to protect the reputation of the royal house or a powerful faction?
It certainly looks suspicious.
And further fueling these suspicions, Sisebuto's young son, Recopolis II, died just 2 months after ascending the throne. It indicates a dangerous pattern of violent and uncertain succession struggles.
That's a chilling pattern of untimely deaths right at the top. It certainly sounds like a kingdom where power was constantly being contested, often violently, who then emerged to try and consolidate power after this turbulent period.
This brings us to Suintila. He was a formidable warrior chief who, actually under Sisebuto, had completed the territorial control of the Iberian Peninsula, effectively pushing the last Byzantines out.
So successful general.
Very. Suintila, writing on this success, understood the inherent weakness of the elective monarchy and actively tried to strengthen the crown against the powerful nobility. Like Leovigild before him, he sought to establish a dynastic line, even associating his son Riciamiro to the throne around 630 or 631.
So another king attempting to sidestep the elective nature of the monarchy to ensure stability. How did that go for Suintila? Better than for Leovigild?
Unfortunately, no. Suintila's attempts prove deeply divisive. His moves to centralize power and create a dynasty alienated both the powerful nobility and irrefutably the church hierarchy as well. This led to his swift removal from power.
Wow, overthrown.
Yeah. This major crisis prompted the Fourth Council of Toledo in December 633. This was an assembly that was profoundly political, not merely ecclesiastical. Saint Isidore of Seville played a crucial, almost constitutional role here, crafting a new political framework for the kingdom.
What did that look like?
Well, the nobility desperately wanted to control the crown, but needed the legitimacy that only the church could provide. The church, in turn, needed a relatively strong and centralized crown to maintain its own structured hierarchy and influence across the peninsula.
A symbiotic relationship, then.
Essentially, yes. This council established a delicate balance. It ensured the crown's power was checked by the combined might of the aristocracy and the church, creating a kind of constitutional framework for the elective monarchy. While it provided some stability, it also enshrined the power of the elites to choose and constrain their kings. It locked in that instability, in a way.
That's a fundamental shift, almost a rebalancing of power, setting up a system of checks and balances, however imperfect it might have been. But beyond the court intrigues and power struggles at the top, what was life like for the average person? What societal strains were evident during the 7th century?
Meanwhile, the very fabric of society faced its own serious strains. The Visigothic laws, particularly those found in Book 9 of the Liber Judiciorum, their comprehensive legal code, which drew heavily from inherited Roman legislation, show a constant struggle with serfs and peasants, known as colonos.
What kind of struggle?
These colonos were tied to the land, but the laws repeatedly referred to them fleeing their lands, running away to other estates, or even escaping to cities. These acts were severely punished, which highlights a systemic issue, a constant tension between the need for agricultural labor and the desire for freedom. It suggests deep-seated economic and social instability.
Right.
Similarly, church councils worried about people fleeing ecclesiastical dependence, leaving church lands or service, sometimes turning to robbery and banditry in remote northern regions. This hints at widespread social dislocation and perhaps lawlessness beyond the reach of central authority.
So a kingdom struggling with both its elite power dynamics and fundamental social and economic challenges at its very base. And what about the cultural landscape during this period of Catholic unification? Were there significant shifts happening there?
Indeed. This period also saw significant Christianization impacting urban landscapes and funerary practices. Old pagan temples or sites associated with earlier indigenous cults were increasingly replaced by churches, physically reshaping cities and
The
towns.
visible change.
Very visible. Cemeteries began to show an increasing use of Christian epitaphs, reflecting a deeper penetration of Christian beliefs into popular consciousness. There were also continuous, often vigorous efforts to suppress magic, divination, and older indigenous cults that persisted, especially in rural areas. This often led to accusations of witchcraft and the establishment of ecclesiastical courts to enforce religious conformity. It was a time of both consolidation of Catholic identity and suppression of anything deemed outside it.
We've seen a kingdom striving for unity, grappling with succession crises and shaping its identity. But as we approach the 8th century, the sources hint at a growing internal weakness, almost a self-inflicted vulnerability, even as a monumental external threat looms on the horizon. What exactly was happening within the Visigothic ruling class just before the Muslim invasion?
What's particularly revealing here is the internal political landscape, which became increasingly fractured and, frankly, dysfunctional. The situation preceding the catastrophe of 711 can be understood not really as a clear conflict between distinct regional factions, like a northern versus southern party, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Instead, the sources point to an ongoing, almost cyclical struggle between two branches of the same family, repeatedly vying for the throne throughout the latter half of the 7th century. This kind of entrenched dynastic rivalry, fought within a relatively small elite, fatally undermined any real sense of national unity or common purpose.
So it was less about broad ideological or regional divides and more about a persistent personal struggle for the crown, almost like a family feud that escalated into a national crisis. Can you give us a concrete example of this?
A significant example is the marriage between King Egica and Chixilo. This was explicitly designed to resolve hereditary issues and reconcile the powerful families of Chindisvinto and Wamba, two previous kings whose lineages were in conflict.
A political solution.
Exactly. It was meant to be a way to unite competing claims to the throne through kinship. However, a crucial problem emerged. A lack of sufficient offspring from this union meant the succession wasn't as clearly secured as intended. This void and the continued ambition of various noble factions then prompted one powerful group to enthrone Witiza, who was deemed old enough to govern, even though this move was a clear break from earlier agreements made with Ervigio's family, another key faction which had initially enabled Egica's own ascent.
Right, so breaking deals.
It shows the fragility of these political marriages and the constant jockeying for power among the elite. Nothing was ever really settled.
It sounds like a house divided, ripe for manipulation and conspiracy. Did this internal strife ever escalate into outright plots or betrayals within the royal court?
Oh, absolutely. This internal strife escalated to the point of outright plotting and violent purges. We see, for instance, the conspiracy by a noble named Sunifredo and Bishop Sispert against King Egica before 693. These weren't isolated incidents. The 16th Council of Toledo, held in the very same year, was then overtly used by Egica, not just for ecclesiastical matters, but to politically settle scores with Ervigio's widow and other nobles whom he considered rivals. The stated purpose was to secure a peaceful succession for Witiza, but in practice it was about eliminating or neutralizing opposition.
So the very institutions meant to provide stability, like church councils, were being weaponized for political vendettas. What were the broader consequences of this relentless internal infighting?
This continuous pattern of dynastic disputes, intense rivalries, and internal coups fundamentally weakened the kingdom's cohesion and its ability to respond effectively to any external threats. The elective nature of the monarchy, despite these repeated attempts at dynastic succession, meant that the death of a king was always a decisive and highly volatile moment.
Right, a moment of opportunity for rivals.
Exactly. It rarely led to smooth transitions. Instead, it often triggered further power struggles, sometimes violent ones, among the competing noble factions. This constant internal erosion left the Visigothic state profoundly vulnerable when the real test came.
It's a striking image. A kingdom so preoccupied with tearing itself apart from within. What do archaeological insights from this period tell us about the culture existing amidst all this political turmoil? Was everything just falling apart?
Interestingly, no. Even the cultural production of this period shows a unique blend, indicating a society that was still dynamic and connected to broader currents, even as its political stability frayed. What we call Visigothic art, particularly evident in sites like Pla de Nadal, demonstrates different styles and periods, including, quite remarkably, columns with bamboo motifs.
Bamboo in Spain.
Yeah. This detail is highly significant, as it indicates clear Oriental influence, likely stemming from trade routes or continued connections across the Mediterranean, perhaps with the Byzantine world or even further east. This cultural dynamism existed even as the political fabric was unraveling, showing that life and artistic expression continued, often absorbing influences from beyond Iberia.
All these internal struggles seem to have created a perfect storm for the kingdom. The political fragmentation, the social unrest, the constant succession battles. It paints a picture of a state on the brink. And then the storm arrived. Let's talk about the final dramatic act, the Battle of Guadalete and the rapid, almost astonishingly swift end of the Visigothic kingdom.
What's truly fascinating here is the stark contrast between the long, complex history we've just discussed, centuries of forging a kingdom, battling for identity, struggling for unity, and the astonishing swiftness of its ultimate demise. The Battle of Guadalete in 711 AD, where the Visigothic Christian army, likely led by King Rodrigo, succumbed to the Muslim Umayyad Caliphate forces under the brilliant commander Euric ibn Ziyad, marked the unequivocal beginning of the end.
Not just a defeat, but the end.
It really was. This wasn't just a defeat, it was a rout, a catastrophic loss that shattered the Visigothic military and political structure almost instantly.
What do we know about the battle itself and the immediate aftermath? Are there any lasting physical reminders of this desperate resistance?
Well, while details of the battle itself are debated by historians, its outcome is not. The Visigothic army was decisively defeated, and King Rodrigo himself is believed to have died either during or shortly after the battle. This left a massive power vacuum. There's a powerful symbolic representation of this final, desperate resistance in places like the Church of the Burned, possibly the martyrial Basilica of San Isidro in Cordoba. This church had reportedly served as a bastion for the last Gothic defenders in 711, a place where they made a final stand before being overwhelmed. Such sites really underscore the ferocity and the last-ditch nature of the Visigothic resistance.
It sounds like a swift, almost unstoppable tide. How quickly did the rest of the Iberian Peninsula fall under Muslim rule after Guadalete?
The speed of the conquest is truly remarkable. Within just 4 years, by 715 or 716, as noted by the contemporary Mozarabic Chronicle of 754, Abd al-Aziz, one of the key Muslim leaders, had effectively imposed peace across Spain, subjecting it to a census and taxes.
4 years. That's incredibly fast.
It is. This chronicle also mentions his marriage to Egilona, the former wife of King Rodrigo, and his dealings with other royal and princely daughters. This illustrates the immediate and profound shift in power and control. The new rulers were not just conquering territory, but also integrating themselves into the existing aristocratic structures through marriage and asserting administrative authority very quickly.
So not just military subjugation, but a rapid political and social reorganization too. How complete was this takeover? Were there pockets of Visigothic resistance that held out?
Although some Visigothic nobles and pockets of resistance held out in the far northern regions, particularly in Asturias, maybe until around 721, and the conquest of Narbonne in Gaul marked another significant milestone in the Umayyad expansion, nearly the entire Iberian Peninsula quickly submitted to Muslim rule. This wasn't merely a military defeat in one battle, it was a systemic collapse. It was rooted in the accumulated internal weaknesses, the profound political fragmentation, and the social disaffection we've explored throughout this deep dive. The Visigothic state, internally brittle and constantly at war with itself, simply lacked the resilience to withstand such a unified and powerful external force when it arrived.
Imagine how quickly the world can change for an entire society. One moment you're living under the rule of a powerful, if flawed, kingdom. The next, a completely new order, a new language, new laws, and a new religion are sweeping across your land. How does a society absorb such a profound, sudden shift? How do individuals navigate that kind of seismic change, and what does it mean for their identity, their future, and the very memory of what came before? It's a moment that utterly reshaped the course of history for the peninsula.
Precisely. It fundamentally altered the trajectory of Iberia for the next 7 centuries and beyond.
So the Visigothic kingdom may have fallen swiftly, almost dramatically, but its impact certainly didn't disappear overnight. What lasting influence did it have on the Iberian Peninsula? And how has its story, and indeed the very name Goth, been interpreted and reinterpreted through the centuries, even to this day.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Visigothic kingdom, despite its turbulent and ultimately catastrophic end, was a true European powerhouse in its time. It not only survived the cataclysmic fall of the Western Roman Empire, but also forged a unique identity and political structure that outlasted and often overshadowed other so-called barbarian kingdoms across the continent.
Right.
Its influence, even now, echoes quite strongly in the region, particularly in the Iberian Peninsula.
That's fascinating because for many, the Visigoths might seem like a distant, almost forgotten chapter. But you're suggesting their imprint was profound, especially in forging a new sense of identity for the peninsula. How did they achieve that, and how was that idea then picked up later?
Absolutely. One of the most significant and perhaps unexpected contributions of the Visigothic kingdom was its role as the creator of the first independent political unity in the Iberian Peninsula. Before them, it was a series of Roman provinces. After their collapse, it was fragmented or under a new non-Visigothic power. But for a substantial period, the Visigoths actually unified the disparate regions into a singular independent kingdom.
The first Spain, in a sense.
In a very real political sense, yes. And this concept, often termed Gothicism, the direct association between a burgeoning Hispanic nation and the Gothic people, became remarkably successful in Hispanic nationalist thought, particularly in Castilian circles later on.
So it's not just about a historical fact, but how that fact was used later on, almost as a foundational myth for Spanish identity, a narrative to legitimize future power.
Precisely. This wasn't just a quaint historical theory. It became a potent cultural and political force. Think of it as a grand narrative, almost a national origin story, that allowed later Spanish monarchs and intellectuals to claim a deep, indigenous lineage, bypassing the Roman and even early medieval periods to root their power in a uniquely Iberian Gothic past.
Right, skipping over the inconvenient bits.
You could say that. You can trace the threads of this Hispanic Gothicism throughout the Middle Ages, long after the kingdom itself was gone. It really began to intensify, especially with the reign of the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, who were busy forging a unified Spanish state from disparate kingdoms.
Okay.
For them, looking back to this period wasn't just historical curiosity. It provided a powerful narrative of ancient, inherent unity that predated even the Arab conquest, legitimizing their own ambitious project of consolidating power and creating a truly unified Spain.
And this continued.
Oh, yes. This idea reached its absolute peak in the 17th century with works like Diego Saavedra Fajardo's Corona Gótica, Castellana y Austriaca from 1646. This monumental work explicitly affirmed a direct continuity between the ancient Gothic monarchy and the Spanish Habsburgs of his own era. It was a powerful tool for legitimizing contemporary rule by linking it to a deep, indigenous past of political unity.
Wow.
And interestingly, Spanish appeals to Gothic ancestry also reinforced Habsburg claims to European dominion more broadly. This transformation is fundamental to explaining the dramatic growth of modern Gothic culture in a different sense. From the 19th century to the present, it was partly inspired by these evolving ideas of historical identity in early modern Europe.
So they were essentially saying, our kings are the rightful inheritors of this ancient, unified kingdom, making our claim to power even stronger and uniquely Spanish. That's a brilliant piece of political messaging. But while that's a brilliant piece of political messaging, how durable was it? Did this foundational myth ever get questioned, especially during periods of internal conflict or external threat to the Spanish monarchy? And this wasn't the only way the Goths were remembered, right? How did their image evolve across Europe more broadly?
That's an excellent point. Foundational myths, while powerful, are always contested, and the Gothic one certainly saw its share of challenges and adaptations over the centuries, reflecting changes in Spain's own self-perception. But beyond Iberia, what's fascinating is the stark duality in how the Goths were perceived. It shifted dramatically depending on time, place, and the political or religious agenda of the interpreter.
How so? Duality.
Well, if you looked at them from south of the Alps, especially in the ancient and medieval periods, Gothic often connoted something fierce, warlike, and destructive of civilization. Why? Because the Goths had achieved what many thought impossible. They defeated the Romans at Adrianople in 378 AD, a blow that led to the death of Emperor Valens himself.
Right, a huge shock.
And they famously sacked the Eternal City of Rome itself in 410, an event that sent shockwaves across the entire empire. Psychologically devastating for a world that believed Rome was invincible. Later, under figures like Theodoric the Great, they came to dominate Italy, Gaul, and Iberia. So to the Roman world and its successors, the Goths were often cast as historical villains precisely because they had overcome Rome. They were the barbarians who broke the unbroken.
I can only imagine the psychological impact of that Rome, the eternal city brought to its knees. That must have fundamentally reshaped how people saw the world. So for centuries, the name Goth became synonymous with destruction. But you mentioned a duality, so there must be another side to this coin, a complete reevaluation.
Indeed. In direct contrast to this barbaric destroyer image, the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century brought a profound reinterpretation. Think of Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517. While the Reformers primarily focused on Christian discipline and theology, their break from Roman Catholic authority also prompted a reassessment of church and state history.
Oh.
From this new anti-Roman perspective, the Goths were no longer villains. Instead, they were reinterpreted as divinely ordained heroes, embodying a vigor and a desire for freedom that overcame the tyranny and decadence that the Reformers increasingly associated with Rome and the papacy.
So they were seen as liberators, breaking free from an oppressive Roman-centric system, much like the Reformers were trying to do in their own time. It's like they found historical ancestors to legitimize their own rebellion.
Exactly. This reinterpretation drew on both medieval conceptions of the translatio imperii, the idea of a transfer of rule or empire, and the burgeoning Renaissance revival in historical studies. This concept, translatio imperii, or the transfer of empire, was crucial.
Explain that a bit more.
It wasn't just about one king replacing another. It was a powerful medieval idea suggesting a legitimate, almost spiritual transfer of imperial authority, prestige, and destiny from one people or ruler to the next. In this case, the German reformers leveraged it to argue that the true, uncorrupted legacy of the Roman Empire, or at least a legitimate form of European leadership and virtue, had passed from decadent Rome to the vigorous Germanic peoples, effectively bypassing the Catholic Church's claim to spiritual and political continuity.
Right, cutting out the middleman, so to speak.
Precisely. The German reformers explicitly drew on this heroic Germanic past to justify their break from Roman oppression. This allowed for a broader shift where, once actual Goths were no longer a distinct political entity, all Germanic peoples, Anglo-Saxons, Germans, Scandinavians, could conceptually become Goths. They were transformed from a particular people into a universal symbol, embodying the highest aspirations of all Germanic tribes for freedom and self-determination. By the end of the 16th century, these contrasting images, the barbaric destroyer and the champion of freedom, circulated widely in educated European society. This dual perception is quite fascinating, showing how historical narratives get shaped and reshaped. Over the 17th and 18th centuries, the term Gothic itself developed a far more universal meaning, particularly in English, so almost anything Germanic or medieval could be described as Gothic, influencing everything from art and architecture to literature.
That's a powerful example of how history isn't just about what happened, but about how we choose to remember and interpret it, often reflecting our own present-day struggles and aspirations. It's incredible to think that a kingdom that ultimately collapsed under external pressure could leave such a deep and lasting imprint, shaping the very identity and legal framework of a nation for centuries to come.
Huh.
I'm struck by the paradox here. A kingdom that ultimately fell could lay such deep foundations. What exactly was it about their legal and intellectual work that allowed it to outlast their own political survival?
This raises an important question. How did they achieve this lasting impact? The ability of the Visigothic monarchy to restore state organization in the Iberian Peninsula, following the tumultuous centuries of Roman decline, was truly remarkable. It helped overcome the significant information deficit that characterized earlier centuries, a period where official Roman sources often gave Hispania scant attention because, well, it was so far from the imperial core. This restoration wasn't just about military conquest. It was made possible through the dedicated efforts of influential intellectual figures like Isidore of Seville, Juan de Biclaro, and Julian of Toledo. Their writings and extensive legal compilations provided the essential intellectual and legal foundations that would persist for centuries, forming a blueprint for future governance.
These weren't just chroniclers then, but active shapers of the kingdom's intellectual and legal identity. They essentially built the operating system for a new society.
Absolutely. Take, for instance, Isidore of Seville, whose monumental etymologies touched upon countless subjects, including legal and social structures, essentially building an intellectual framework for the entire age. Juan de Biclaro, despite his acknowledged Hispano-Gothic nationalist bias, meticulously chronicled events, emphasizing the unity of the Gothic kingdom and even equating it with the empire itself. lending it imperial gravitas. Julian of Toledo also contributed significantly, often through his crucial role in the church councils that had profound political implications, helping to craft the legal and theological consensus. Together, their works, alongside abundant juridical and conciliar documentation, including things like hagiographies, saints' lives, epistles, official letters, homilies, and other ecclesiastical literature, filled the information void left by the fading Roman Empire. These weren't just dusty old texts, they became the operating manual for a new society, stepping into the breach left by Rome.
So their legal and religious texts weren't just for their immediate time, but created a blueprint for future governance and society, a kind of cultural and legal legacy that persisted even after the kingdom itself was gone.
Precisely. This rich body of work, particularly legal compilations like the Liber Judiciorum, their comprehensive legal code, which drew heavily from inherited Roman legislation, served as a fundamental legal framework for centuries, even under Muslim rule in many areas. These laws addressed everything from property rights to that persistent, vexing problem of serfs or colonos fleeing their lands.
Right, the runaways.
Yeah. This wasn't just a minor administrative headache. It pointed to deep systemic issues in their agrarian economy and social structure, highlighting a constant tension between the need for labor and the desire for freedom, and revealing much about the realities of Visigothic society. The documentation from church councils also shows a society actively engaged in shaping its administrative, moral, and social fabric.
Okay.
What these sources collectively demonstrate is Hispania's unique capacity to maintain solid territorial organization and remarkably stable economic and social structures, even after the Western Roman Empire's disappearance. This sustained stability, nurtured by Visigothic institutions, allowed the monarchical system they implemented to endure for almost 2 centuries and profoundly influence the successor kingdoms that emerged from the Reconquista much later. This wasn't merely survival. It was the deliberate creation of a new, resilient framework upon which future Iberian states would build.
It's incredible to think that a kingdom that ultimately collapsed under external pressure could leave such a deep and lasting imprint, shaping the very identity and legal framework of a nation for centuries to come. Their twilight truly cast long shadows and bright lights.
Indeed. And it leads us to a provocative thought for you, the listener. What does it truly mean for a society to draw its fundamental identity from a fallen kingdom, particularly one so complex and internally conflicted as the Visigothic? How does the twilight of one era inevitably cast long shadows and bright lights on the eras that follow, influencing perceptions, political narratives, and cultural self-understanding in ways that can persist for a millennium or more?
A profound question, and one that encourages us all to look deeper into the foundations of the world around us. And that's where we'll leave our deep dive into the twilight of the Visigothic kingdom for now. The study continues in the next part, where we'll explore even more hidden corners of history.